All right, everybody. This is my attempt to go through everybody's homework 4 that's submitted. I hope I got everybody's downloaded. If I didn't get yours, there's nothing personal. It's not very easy to get everybody's downloaded. Okay. If you got a score, that's great. Okay. That's the important thing for you. What you'll learn from this conversation that I have with you and me showing these examples is where people did things that I think were good, and then areas of things that I would suggest improving for your project. Now, you went into this with not a lot of direction, and I get that. And some of you have done this before, and some of you have not done it before. So please don't take anything that I criticize personally. Okay? You're all learning, and you're not going to learn unless you can take criticism. Okay? So I'm going to go through all of these examples. There's a lot of them. I've removed the names, any other identifying information on them. But you ought to be able to see which one's yours and recognize it. Okay? So with that, let me just go through these. And there's no particular order. I'm just going through them on how they are on my screen, and then I'll close them out. So you were to write up a little bit about your drawing. I'm not going to talk about that so much. Okay? My only feedback there is I would draw first, sketch it out, and actually this is how I would do it. And this is how I do it. I don't know if you can see because the room's pretty dark right now, but I have a couple of whiteboards behind me. Generally, when I'm just trying to go through the process of understanding my problem, I will use the physical whiteboard behind me and kind of sketch it out with a marker because I can draw very fast. And then once I've sketched it out on the whiteboard and I've erased things and I've kind of figured out generally how the pieces go together, that's when I would then take it and put it into some sort of computer tool. Incidentally, you could do the same thing on an iPad, by the way. So you could use the drawing software on an iPad as well. Okay. As far as the narrative goes, that's not typically what you would have with an architecture. So typically an architecture would be a full-blown design document that goes into the details of every little thing that you do. You'd have an executive summary, and then you'd have a number of different architecture drawings, starting at a high-level picture of what the overall systems are going to look like. So, if we're talking cloud, that might be that there's 2 regions, and we're using AWS and GCP and Azure, and we're using 2 regions per each one of those. And we're going to have some number of VMs, but we don't call out the individual VMs. We're going to have some databases. We're going to have some load balancers, and we're going to have some storage and whatnot. And then we might dive in deeply into, say, Amazon West and have a diagram just for that. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you the first example here. So I'm going to go ahead and make this bigger. And so in this case, it looks like the person used Lucidchart for this. Okay. And so what they did is they've put together what I think is a very clean diagram here, and I think it looks very professional. And this is very similar to what I might see a professional put together. I'm actually very impressed by it. These days, I like when you can use vendor icons when it makes sense. It helps me to visualize the product and recognize the product, and it gives it a pop. So it makes it a lot easier for me to understand it and see it up on the PowerPoint screen in a conference room. Okay. Now, we've logically got the user, which is generally where we see things start. The user's computer, they connect to the cloud, and we have a west region and an east region. Okay. And we can see that they have this duplicated in both regions. Okay. It's calling out, there's a label, so I know what this is. This is a virtual machine. This is Vault. We're going to use Vault for credentials. We're using Docker containers and Nomad as a container manager, okay, or orchestrator. And then we've got a Cloud SQL instance here. Okay? And then we're using storage. Now, this is a good, still relatively high-level drawing. What I would want to see on your project, though, is you also have a bit more detail. So what I would do is, this is a really good high-level overview, giving me kind of the 50,000-foot overview from the sky. Now what I would do is I would do a drawing for West Coast and a drawing for East Coast, and I would get into more details. Now, I don't need you to go in and say, I'm going to have 200 VMs and put 200 VMs in. I'm going to show you an example of that here in a few minutes. of an example where there's far too much going on in the drawing for me to even be able to make sense of it, okay? So when we kind of zoom in on, say, the West region right now, we are going to have some virtual machines. So I could depict that with maybe a couple of VMs, VM icons, and then, you know, times n, and n being whatever number I need, and I might indicate that's an auto scaling group, okay? Meaning that as my business needs to grow my cloud infrastructure of VMs, I will scale out as needed using an auto scaling group, okay? So you're going to want to get into the detail on the more detailed diagrams of things like VMs. These VMs are auto scaling VMs for web servers. These VMs are auto scaling groups behind load balancers for application servers. You might even get into the detail of these are a pool of application servers for IBM WebSphere. These are a pool for SAP, whatever it might be. Okay. The other thing you would have on the detailed drawings for the West region and the East region, both individually, would be network information like VPCs. Okay, so we're going to have a VPC for our databases, and you might even get into the level of IP addresses and giving it a private range or something. I wouldn't expect that out of the class. Okay, we don't go into really IP addresses in this class, but in the real world, you would probably have an IP range that you would list of this particular VPC is this network name, and maybe even these IP address ranges, okay? So this is a good start for a high-level architecture overview. And again, anybody who did this assignment got full credit for it. Okay? I made it very clear, as long as you do it. But you should learn from this experience, learn from this video, and use that to improve when you do your project, okay? So again, this is a model example of a high-level overview, okay? And you're welcome to, if this was yours and you are comfortable sharing it, you're more than welcome to share it in Microsoft Teams with the class, okay? If you want to, but it's completely optional. So go ahead and save that. And let's go on to the next one here. So the next one here looks like that they use the Cloudcraft, okay? Again, I told you the Cloudcraft was just for AWS, okay? So if I zoom in here, I can see that we have two regions, West and East. Okay? I can see that they've set up a management VPC. I can see this orange indicates a auto scaling group, okay? And I can see that in both regions there's an auto scaling group. Actually, the way to depict this, have it correct, is you would have an auto scaling group within a region. So this orange, yellowish arrow thing would actually be scooted over here over these three VM boxes, and you would do another orange arrow over here to represent. You don't have auto scaling groups between the regions, okay? So you're going to have that within the region. Now, you can have an auto scaling group across the availability zones if you wanted. Yeah, you would, and then you would do elastic load balancers here, which it looks like that's what these are supposed to represent. Since I'm not 100% sure what some of these icons are, your best bet would be to do, a label like Elastic Load Balancer, EOB. You can just use the abbreviations that Amazon or Google use for their services. So EC2, S3, VPC, EOB, those sorts of things, you can just use those abbreviations, okay? Now we also see that there are another set of instances here, and these being M4 size, okay? Just like the ones here. Now, what I wasn't clear about is there's an arrow over here, but there isn't an arrow over here. So just make sure it's consistent across the board. Over here you have a secondary and two primaries. Okay? And over here you have three primaries of databases. Okay? Usually you want to have consistency between environments so that if suddenly US East went away, US West would be identical. So generally speaking, you try to have identical between regions. Now that's not always possible, but we do try to do that just so that if something breaks, we have an equal copy somewhere else, okay? But beyond that, this is another way using Cloudcraft. You can use this, and one of the benefits I like about this is you can export the budget. So this will tell you roughly what the costs are. There's a backend API that's talking to Amazon to get current pricing. So now you not only export your diagram here, you also can export the budget, plop it into your presentation, and now the executives know exactly how much it's going to cost. Okay. Now, with respect to the write-up here, this is a narrative of exactly what's going on. This is what you were supposed to do. Okay. Now, for your assignment in this class, you're going to do something similar with the actual project when you do your diagrams. You have a high-level diagram and however many detailed ones you need to articulate your design. Okay. In the real world, again, this would go as part of a design document. It would be more of a formal document. It would have different sections in it. You don't need to do that for this class. Now, that being said, if you choose to do that and you want to go do the research on how to do that, then you could earn extra credit points. Okay? All right, so let's go on to the next example. Okay. So this one here is what I would say is another great example of a diagram here. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about this particular example. So in this example, we've got a VPC around these items and an auto-scaling group here. Okay. The only comment I would have is if you're going to have this in US West, I start questioning why don't you have it in US East. Okay. So here we've got arrows representing potentially data flows. More likely these might be lines because data tends to flow in multiple directions between systems. So in general, you might have lines, maybe you might have firewalls and other things like VPCs on them, okay? But this is a good overview of the two regions, and there's nothing wrong with doing something a little with fewer icons and just just using shapes. There's nothing wrong with that. Just beware that you do want to make it easy for people to see, so you might want to consider using different colors for different regions. You might even have multiple availability zones within a particular region. So you might be using US East A and US East B, right? So you've got two availability zones. You'd want to make sure you represent that architecture. Now, this is a good high level. What you could then go a little bit more in depth on each one of these. Okay? And so overall that looks good. And so I think, this is a good high level overview. Again, just if you're going to do auto scaling groups of VPCs, just make it consistent across the board. Okay? Okay, so let me look at this example and talk about this one. So in this case, we have a narrative talking about it. And this is actually one of the examples I had of, this one's a little busy, okay? What I would do is do a high-level overview of the two regions, and then I would do a detailed one, and you can always zoom in on a particular area. So you could zoom in on VPC1 and have a diagram for just VPC1, as long as you have a higher level diagram that brings VPC1, VPC2, VPC3, etc. together, okay? I'm also not clear on what some of these things are. Some of these I'm very familiar with. Primary, secondary. I'm not sure what R is. But you want to just make sure that you have something to indicate what they are. If there's not enough room to write on them, what you can always do is take one of these, put it to the side, P equals primary, S equals secondary, whatever it might be. Okay. I do like how this has auto scaling groups, has some VPCs, and also shows some networks. The other thing here that's interesting is there's a CloudFront CDN. We didn't talk about that. CDNs are the content delivery networks that we can use for making sure content is accessible in a quicker manner. Okay, so if we have a lot of static content, videos, images, text, we want to have that as close to the customer as possible. So we distribute that through a content delivery network, and we could use CloudFront on Amazon. That's a CDN. Or we could use a third party like Fastly or, Akamai. That's the other one. Okay. but we can use that to make sure the content is close to our customers. When we're watching movies and we're watching or looking at pictures and stuff, the websites that we go to are keeping certain content as close as possible to the user and distributing it. If they pre-distribute it to, say, let's say, we're all in Southern California, okay? If we had to go to Los Gatos, I think it's Los Gatos is where Netflix is. Los Altos or Los Gatos, one of those two. Anyhow, wherever Netflix is at, every time we want to watch a movie, that would be very time consuming for the movie to be downloaded to our local point. So the most popular content can get preloaded on these content delivery networks and preloaded to a server that's close to my location. Okay? So let's say that there's a CDN endpoint in San Marcos somewhere. There might be. And so in that case, Netflix has a job that automatically pushes the most commonly requested content down to that location. And so now when you go stream it, you're streaming it from San Marcos as opposed to streaming it from Los Altos or Los Gatos, wherever they're located. Okay? So the one comment I have about this one is, again, it's very busy. And I think if you just did a high level diagram and then some more detailed diagrams breaking it down to the region and then the VPC level, I think this would be fine. Okay, with maybe some more labels on it. Okay? All right, so on to this one. Okay, so this one, it looks like the two-dimensional view of Cloudcraft was used. Okay, so Cloudcraft has a 3D view and a 2D view. Okay, so this was done in the 2D view. It shows the same general information though. So you've got a boundary of the network here. In this case, this is the health data. Okay, so HIPAA has certain requirements. We're going to get into compliance just a little bit here soon. So we'll talk about compliance. I don't remember if it's next week or the week after, but anyhow, we'll talk a little bit about it. And HIPAA is one of those compliance areas that we care about. Okay, so we've got US East and West. So this is a good high level view for us. Okay, now we would then also want to dive in a little deeper into each one of these to actually get into the details. Okay. Now, that one, we'll move on. And okay, oh, here it is. Okay, so this is very similar to the last one. Okay, we've got a representation of a vault is going to manage security for everything. Okay. And then we've got two regions here, US East and West. Okay, we can see our S3 storage buckets. We can see load balancers. We can see that we've got metrics here for both regions. And then, I'm not sure what this icon is, but then we've got several auto-scaling groups, some databases, and then sharing of data using encryption. Okay, so I'm thinking this is representing like an encrypted VPN tunnel or something between the sites. Okay, it would be good to have some labels or at least some a key on the side to tell me what that is. Okay? Because you don't want to be, I speak from experience like this, you don't want to be in a meeting trying to sell your solution to the executives and then have them say, excuse me, I don't know what this is. Is that a square that's grown legs like a spider? I mean, I don't know. People might say things like that. I don't know, right? So you've got to tell us what these things are. Just assume that we don't know. So these make sense, and that's probably a poor example using that. But I know what an M4 is. Most people recognize that's a compute because it looks like a computer chip. But if you're in a meeting with a bunch of business people who aren't technical, you might need to have a key. I would have some sort of legend or key that tells people what the icons mean. Okay. And what I would tend to do is present it at the same time you present in the diagram. So if you can't fit it on your diagram, that's okay. Present your diagram and in the window next to it have the key. Okay. So that's my comment for that one. All right. Here is another example. And in this example, they used Lucidchart. Oh, it looks like this person also used Cloudcraft. Okay, but they presented it as Lucidchart. So here we've got a diagram. We're showing Google. Okay, we're using Google East and West. We're showing these are the types of other services we're using. Okay, on the high level diagram, this is fine. As you get in more depth, you're going to want to make sure that you have these in a more detailed view of your environment. Okay, so you might have multiple VPCs, and there's one for data loss prevention or whatever this might be. You might have a VPC for a different service. Okay. Generally, I wouldn't, if it were me, I would not put my database and my storage and my web VMs and my app VMs on the same VPC. I would have a VPC for my web systems. I'd probably have a VPC for my application systems, and then I might have a VPC for my databases. Okay. It really depends on how I'm securing my network. And now I need to assume that if I'm going to use zero trust security, I'm just going to assume that my network is unsecure, and therefore I need to protect the data in the applications and systems. Okay. But all the same, I might want to have that capability so that if I had a problem, I could segment off the network if needed. Okay. So just because I have a VPC doesn't mean I need to get all crazy with the using firewalls and things like that. I don't have to use firewalls at all if I don't want to. Okay. But the VPC does help me to organize my systems. All right. And so, this is a good overview. I would just then on the real project, I would make sure you had details of each region that you could go into more detail. Okay. Okay. So this one here, again, someone used, it looks like Lucidchart. Okay. They have US West and they have US East, and they have one availability zone per region. Again, for availability, we probably would do 2 availability zones per region, just so that we have redundancy. Now, maybe we can't afford to do that. Maybe we can get by with only doing in one. But if we want maximum availability, we would do maybe 2 availability zones per region, do at least 2 regions. Now, if we want to have international customers, this example, we didn't have that. Okay. For the project, you might determine that you need to have international operations. If we are operating in Europe, for example, as we'll talk about when we get to compliance, we probably are going to have an infrastructure built out in one of the EU countries. Okay. But again, this is a good high level, and it goes into the in depth a little bit. The user comes in, and normally you would have load balancers here. So as coming in, you'd have load balancers on the outside to direct to your first set of systems. You'd have load balancers at each tier. So for your web servers, any application servers, you probably have load balancers. And then you probably have load balancers even for some types of databases. And then you would have auto-scaling groups for the VMs so that as traffic increases, it auto-scales out. As traffic decreases, it auto-scales down. Okay. And then you would probably have your S3 bucket, which would then be available to any of your applications, your VMs, etc. If you're using Kubernetes, your Kubernetes containers would then be able to access that S3 storage potentially. Your MySQL, if you're using AWS's RDS, you could do multiple availability zone deployment with encryption like is done here. That's probably what I would do for the business case that you had here. I would use, if it were me and I had a small team like I gave you in the hypothetical, I wouldn't try to go build my own database servers. I would go and say, you know what? I don't have a good DBA team. I need someone else to run that for me. Why don't I use the relational database service where I'm basically buying the database as a service? Okay. That is totally a valid architecture, and honestly, that's what I used when I had my business. I didn't want to run a database. Yes, I know how to run a database. No, do I want to run a database? Heck no, I don't want to do that. Okay. So I let Amazon run the RDS for me, and I just said I want a multi-availability zone database with encryption and boom, it deployed it for me. And then all I have to do is point my application to it. Okay. So that would be a perfectly valid architecture, and I think that's great that some of you, actually it looks like multiple people have done this on their architecture so far. So this is great. All right, the next one here would be this one here. And actually I think this is nicely done. Okay, there's a good amount of detail, but it's still very readable. Okay. And so, oh, I guess R must be read-only replica. Okay. So we could use read replicas for doing analytics and reporting. Okay. So here we've got 2 regions in AWS, and we've got load balancers, and those load balancers are routing to auto scaling group. And we've got an auto scaling group here and an auto scaling group here. Then we have a backend pool of servers here with its own auto-scaling group, and we've got S3, and each of these is on a VPC. And then we have our databases back here. Okay. And so I think this is a perfectly nice architecture. It's relatively clean. The only thing it's just so minor is sometimes it's a good idea if you're going to use color to use a color that's not super bright like this. This yellow is a little hard on the eyes, but it could be because I'm getting old. Okay. So just be aware of the color schemes. Just try to find something that's not super bright and unreadable. Yellow's generally very hard to read in something like this. Okay. So good job on that, whoever's that was. All right, so we've got this one here. And so here's another example. So they've zoomed in so we can see it a little bit more, but let's just start here. So what do we have? We have west, east, we have a user, we have a load balancer, we have auto scaling groups with T3 sized instances. Okay. We have M5 sized instances with auto scaling groups. Okay. Then we have what looks like the RDS service, and we have a primary with some S3 storage, primary with some S3 storage, and then we also have another region here which is US Central. And US Central just has an RDS standby redundancy server. So this person was thinking about DR. Okay. And so we zoom in, we can see more details. Okay. I think this is overall very nicely done. Okay? The only thing I would say is it is a little hard to read some of this stuff, except when you zoom in. So just be mindful of yellow can be a little hard to read on the gray background. It's not so bad on the other stuff, but on the gray background, it's kind of hard to read. That's the only comment there. Okay? I think that gets me to all the PDF versions. Okay, so let me just start with this one here. And so with this particular example, I hope that my machine doesn't crash. Okay, so we've got the user, they're coming on devices. So my first comment here is I would pick one of these 4 icons and just use it to represent the user. You don't need to represent every potential type of device they might come in on. Okay. So just represent that you've got a user. You can represent it with any of these, okay? But you don't need all 4 of them. They're coming in through the internet. That's what the cloud typically represents in drawings like that. Okay, they're coming in through the internet, and they're going to GCP. Okay? We have a load balancer. We have databases and Cloud SQL and VPC, and then some cloud storage. So here's my feedback on this. First of all, I don't see regions here. I'm assuming there's 2 regions because it's 2 bubbles. I would be clear on what regions you're proposing. Okay, so is it U.S. West, U.S. East, EMA, Asia Pacific, whatever it is. Okay. Second thing is you have a lot of databases here, but you don't have any web or application servers or even any VMs that I can see. And your load balancers for the user would come in and hit some sort of VM or container. It could be a container, it could be a virtual machine, doesn't matter which one. but your user's not going to hit the database directly. They're going to hit some sort of web server interface, and that's going to be backed by a set of some sort of application server. So as an example, let's say we have a web application, our website. We might have, and for your project, you will be doing this. You might have web servers, application servers, and database servers for your website. You might also have cloud storage for your website. Okay, you're going to have load balancers in front of your web servers. You probably would have load balancers in front of your application servers, a different set of load balancers. Okay, so to be kind of in between here. And then you'd have maybe even load balancers for your databases. Okay, that depends a bit more, but I would make sure you break that out, and then also specify any auto scaling groups that you have for your virtual machines, containers, etc. You'll also want to represent, if you're using containers, or even if you're using VMs, I suppose. If you're using an orchestrator like Kubernetes or Nomad, then you want to indicate that on there as well. Okay. You're going to want to indicate things like your Vault, that you have Vault running to protect the data. So you could indicate that you have, a pool of Vault servers. Okay. And do they store the data locally, or do they store it to the cloud storage? Maybe you've got it set up where they write to the cloud storage. In that case, you would link your Vault servers to the cloud storage. Okay. And then for monitoring and things, those are generally either at each region level and then roll up at a broader level. But if you're doing something like Amazon's monitoring or Google's in-house monitoring, you can represent that outside of the regions, okay? Because that's managed by Amazon or Google. So they're going to provide it. You don't need to represent it because honestly, you don't know where that sits. You don't know where the cloud monitoring service for Amazon sits. It might be in every region, okay? Or it might be in the region, but you don't need to represent it down here. You would represent it at a little bit higher level. Now, if you're going to set up your own Elastic Stack, chances are you're going to have to run that in every region. Okay? Now, what you could do is have a command and control region that could be in west, east, central, doesn't really matter, and it can be in multiple places. It probably is good to have it in multiple places. Okay? And that region or those regions would be only used for your command and control. So you wouldn't run any customer-facing services in some of those. Those would be like your administrative regions. Okay, and so that's where like your monitoring stuff ultimately goes to, and you store things locally within a region, but then you might funnel it up to those regions that you use for administrative purposes. Okay, all right, so let's move on. Okay, so this one here is nice. Okay, we've got the user, database, their containers, a container manager like Nomad, and then their SQL database. And then they've got the object storage here. So again, here in this situation, you wouldn't be accessing the database directly. That's the only thing I see here. This would actually sit back here someplace. Okay. You would actually access through your load balancer to your container instances or virtual machines or whatever you use, your Nomad or Kubernetes or Mesos or whatever would manage the container instances for you, and then you would have your database here. Okay? So this is a very good overview, and then I would expand it into a more detailed diagram for each region. Okay, but great job, looks very professional, very clean. Okay, now this one here, this one is using Lucidchart, I believe. And so the only, well, a couple things here. We've got a lot of users here. Again, I would use one user to represent. Okay? The gateway is just going to be the internet. Okay, unless you got something like VPN or something, you're just going to have a user going through the internet. Okay. Now, they're going to hit GCP. You've got a load balancer. You've got firewall rules here. This is all good. Okay. You would have maybe a web server. Okay. And this is good from a high level, although it would be better if you either used icons or used different colors and different shapes to represent different things. Um, and then here you have a bunch of different services, it looks like. Uh, I would, at a high level, this would be fine. I would, for your more detailed diagram, break out the specific ones that you're actually going to use and what it's actually communicating with. Okay. So if you're using CDN, for example, that's actually not going to sit back here. A CDN is going to sit out here on the internet, and you're going to be sending data to that, and that data is going to be fed directly to your users when they request it. Okay? So that one's good. Let's go ahead and close that one. So just make sure you think about that feedback for your final project. Okay. This looks like another Cloudcraft. So we've got an auto scaling group here. We've got some buckets, west and east. Okay. We've got a security policy, it looks like, and the user here. Again, you could just consolidate this into one of the 4 icons. You don't have to have all of them. Now, this is good at a high level, but you would need to have more detail on your actual detailed east-west drawings, okay? Because your service would be probably, depending on what you're doing, you've got databases, you've got applications, you've got web servers. I mentioned a web application, okay, like a website. That is going to have something like a web server. Nginx, Apache, those are web servers, okay? It's going to have some sort of application running on it. In the case of a lot of websites run on WordPress. WordPress would be the application tier, okay? And then WordPress, well, that can either sit on a separate machine or it can sit on the same machine as the web server. But the WordPress runs in the language called PHP. And so you'd still have to have a web server even if you ran it on a separate machine. And then you'd also have a database because WordPress uses a database. You'd have a database machine as well. Okay? And presumably you'd have to have auto scaling groups and load balancers. Now, one of the things you could do is you could use the marketplace image on Google Cloud for WordPress and deploy WordPress for your project using the WordPress image that's available out on GCP. You could also roll your own. Okay, so there are marketplace images that are pre-configured for applications, and that might be something you do. Just be aware, sometimes they cost money. The WordPress ones from Bitnami are free, but not all of them are free. So be careful about using the marketplace. Okay, because you could use up all of your credits by downloading and rolling out one image if it's an expensive one. Okay. That's all I have to say about this one. More detail. Next one here. Okay, it looks like Lucidchart was used. Oops. Okay, so we've got here we've got this object storage. Okay. We've got some VMs, and we've got the management console and some other things. Okay. So my feedback on this is not enough detail, and it's actually not clear to me how this would be implemented. Okay. So what I would say you would want to do if this is yours is you would want to break out into the regions, and you would want to have a little bit more detail on each. And you want to have a starting point at the user, because you want to have an understanding of where is the user coming from and how do they get into the region and how do they hit the different services. Okay? Your most secure services are probably pretty far back in the network here. Okay? And I'm not sure why. So I don't even know what some of these services are. So if you're going to put these in the diagram, you need to actually, then I don't know if you did up here in the above. I'm not looking at that right now. But if you're using, say, HSM, this is a hardware security manager, I believe. This is used by tools like Vault and other security software. So if you're using this, I'd want to know in the actual write-up why you're using this and what purpose it solves. Okay. Same with certificate manager. That's great. I'm sure you need to manage certificates. Why are you choosing AWS's certificate manager? What is the benefit that you get from using that? Because I want to understand why we would use a service, because these services add up in terms of money. Okay, so it's very important that we know why we're using a particular service. Okay, that's it for that one. All right, so this one here, we're taking a little bit different approach here. I'm not sure what, maybe this was done in Lucidchart. I don't really know. It doesn't really matter though. Okay, we've got a user. They're coming in through the cloud, and we have two different cloud platforms. Okay, we have region 1, region 2. We have object storage. We have databases. We have container management. We have Vault. This to me is not really an architecture per se. It's more of like a presentation that I would see in a slide of why we're moving to the cloud. This needs to be logically organized around a user comes in, they're hitting a website. The website talks to an application, whether it's an actual website or it's something like SAP or some other application, or payroll system, whatever it is. And then that is talking to a database in the back end. That would be how I would structure this up into two regions. So start at where the user's hitting. They're going to see a web server. The web server is going to see app servers. The app servers are going to see the database servers. And maybe the app servers are going to see storage. Maybe the web servers are going to see object storage. Database servers not as likely to see the object storage because they're going to store their data somewhere on the network. Okay. So, and then Vault is going to be kind of the glue between them for security. So you would have probably a cluster of Vault servers. And this, by the way, could represent a cluster. Okay. And so I would just try to clarify, and you've seen some other examples. So I think, you should look at some of the other examples. And for the actual project, you would want to make sure that you put together something that was very clear in terms of the services you're using, how they relate to one another. Because each one of these services builds on something else. All right, let's just go ahead and close that one now. We're getting to the end. Almost done here. Okay. So we've got this diagram here, and this is an example of another architecture. So we have a user. They come in through load balancing. That's good. They're coming in through a front end. It looks like a controller. Okay. You've got a security service here to, I presume, validate that the user is authorized. Okay. You have some sort of controller here. And then you've got some virtual machines in west and east. Okay. And you've got databases. I think this is a good high level. You don't need to have a ton of lines on your high level drawing. You can have, a representation, like one line that comes in here and then branches out from here. So you have fewer lines across your diagram. Okay? But when you get into the detail here, you probably should have some logical network drawings that show where traffic's going for different things. Okay? All right, here's another example here. This is actually what I was just talking about before. So we do have some lines, but we have fewer lines crossing over the drawing. Okay, so we've got a firewall, we've got a load balancer, we have secrets manager, we have a Nomad service that's managing these containers. We're using Compute Engine to drive VMs. I would just clarify, what are these VMs for? Are these for Apache and Nginx? What are the containers for? Are these for Nginx or Apache? Maybe you're using Nomad containers here, which would be actually Docker containers on Nomad. Maybe we're using those for our web servers because they're lightweight and we can spin them up very quickly. Okay. So maybe our web servers are here and they're connecting to the cloud storage for their data. And then maybe our web servers talk to some VMs here that are behind a load balancer that run our application. Okay, so they're going and getting application information. And then we would also have our databases somewhere here. They're not depicted here. But you can see the example here of regions. So we have West Central, and then we have within an availability zone. Okay, West 1-A. There might be a West 1-B. Okay. So we might have multiple availability zones. So we can depict this by doing different colored boxes. So this is, I think this is done very nicely, aside from there's some information missing, and I would just clarify what things are for and what they're doing. Okay. So I would always start with, again, physical whiteboard if you've got one. If not, a piece of paper is always good. Shift, once you kind of get the sketched out design, shift to the online program, and then go from there to write the narrative based on your diagram. Okay? And as you write the narrative, if it doesn't make sense, you go back and you change your diagram. Now, I will also make a comment about here coming up in a few weeks. We're getting down to the wire. Okay, we're past the halfway point of the class now. We only have a few more weeks of substantive content left. Okay, the last 4 weeks are going to be you working on your project. No more lectures, no more new material. Okay, which means I will have additional time to meet with you to go over things like your architecture. Okay. Now, we have to be fair, and so I sent out a request. I want to help those of you who are behind catch up. Okay. And so I've asked for availability for people who need the extra help. Okay. If you're already coming to my office hours or the tutoring sessions and you're caught up, I understand you want to meet with me, and that's great, but I need to meet with those who need the help to catch up first. Okay. So those sessions are for those who have not been able to finish the homeworks through homework 4. Okay. So if you've fallen behind, I'll help you catch up, but you need to make the time to meet with me. Okay. Now, the other thing is, as we get into the point where we don't have any new material, I'm going to open up office hour slots to meet with me. Okay. We're going to start off with by giving everybody an opportunity to meet with me once. Okay. You need to be prepared for that meeting. So when we do meet, you need to have already done some work on the project. Okay. You can't come to me and say, I haven't started the project, and what should I do? Okay. You need to get started on the project before you come to that meeting. You can bring your architecture to me, but it should be in a reasonably good state where you've gone through, watched this video, seen the examples, improved it, and then brought it to me in a reasonably finished state. And then I can give you feedback on it. Okay? It wouldn't be a bad idea for you to kind of have an idea of what you want to do when you come to me. Okay? You're also welcome to bring your draft presentation if you'd like me to take a look at it. Okay. And if you have started doing the implementation work, I am happy to look at your Terraform files, your Vault files, any other materials. Okay. Because we did accept a lot more students than we were planning for, I'm not going to be able to walk you through doing your project. Okay. This is the test for the class, so you'll have roughly about a 15-minute session with me. Okay, you're not going to have time for me to walk you through how to do the project. That's why you need to come to me before then, when I can give you a lot more time. I've set aside 1-hour appointment windows. There are a couple times when I only have 30 minutes available. Okay. But if you want one of those 1-hour appointment windows, go ahead and grab it. I can take two students per 1-hour window, and I ought to be able to help both of you out simultaneously. Okay? Again, first come, first serve. So early bird gets that worm. All right, so make sure you read that announcement that I posted. And then this one, we're going to go ahead and close. We're getting down. There's only a few more left for me to go through. Okay, here's one done in Cloudcraft. I actually like this one a lot. I like it for a number of reasons. Number one, it's color-coded. I can see the teal is west, and even specifically Oregon. Okay, I can see that this is West 1, California, and it's purple. Okay. I like that because it's color coded. Now I can visually see what region's which. Now my only observation here is you have things in West 1 and West 2. I would be careful about only having it in one region. Okay. So I'm assuming you're trying to go for availability zones or availability domains. And so this would be in the West region, you would have maybe 2 availability zones, okay, within the West region. Then you would have in the East region, you would have 2 availability zones. Okay, so just make sure you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, because if there's a catastrophic event on the West Coast or a fiber line gets cut somewhere in the middle of the U.S., you're kind of screwed. Okay, for anybody who's not on the West Coast isn't going to be able to access your site. Okay, so I would make sure you had redundancy. I also try to cite things as far away from one another as possible. So if I'm going to cite something in California, I don't want to cite something where there could be earthquakes and damage from earthquakes, or a volcano, or a storm that could, or a wildfire that could impact the whole western part of the U.S. So I would try to cite something on the East Coast or in the Midwest. Okay. U.S. Central is a perfectly fair place to put something in addition to West. Okay. There are benefits to putting them in places. There are downfalls to putting them in different places. So, if you've got the East Coast and you put it in anywhere on the eastern seaboard, you've got hurricane issues, potential tornado issues, flooding, okay, snowstorms, that sort of thing. If you put them on the Midwestern part of the U.S., central region, you might have tornadoes, prairie fires, that sort of thing, okay, blizzards. If you put it on the West Coast, again, earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, that sort of thing. So you've just got to kind of weigh out the risks, and based on your budget, put it where it makes sense. Okay? Ideally, you put it everywhere. But the reality is, in this scenario, you have a finite budget. You have a very small budget. You have a very small team. You're probably going to have to just pick 2 regions and stick with that. Okay?